Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by an extremely successful and hardworking whitetail hunter, Mike Perry. Mike is from Pennsylvania, has proven what it takes to be consistently successful over the years hunting big woods, swamps. We discuss a lot of topics in this episode, including postseason scouting, terrain features in flatland, buck and doe bedding areas, hunting creek bottoms, stories from past successful hunts, and the top lessons he has learned from over the years. On this week's Mountain Buck Monday story of the week, it comes from Jameson Grady out of Maine. And Jameson, this is Jameson's second time in 2 years writing in with an absolute Maine giant. So Jameson says, I didn't think I would top my mountain buck story from last season, but passing younger bucks and persistence paid off again. Amazing last day rifle season in the big woods of Maine. Finally got snow again in an area I've tracked bucks before. Well, 2 different buck tracks, 2 mountains, 2 cross dirt roads, 8 to 10 miles, and 8 hours later, I met up with this guy chasing a doe. I was just about to quit on the track and call it a year, but pushed on, and glad I did. He was a 196-pound 11 point. This is a really cool deer. You can check it out. He's got 11 points, as he said, some kickers coming off it. If you go to East Meets West Hunt on Instagram or East Meets West Outdoors on Facebook, give it a like and follow, and check out the post there and submit your entry to Mountain Buck Monday by sending an email to beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com or just filling in the contact us form on the website. All right, so in other news, before we get into this episode here, postseason scouting is definitely in full effect. The snow has melted here in Pennsylvania and been out quite a bit, checking out some areas. I've been picking up a few sheds along the way, but really trying to gain some intel, pulling some cameras, and just seeing what sign has been laid down and try to put together some pieces of the puzzle. I've been trying to figure out one deer specifically, and struggling to figure out where he's coming from. He's just not laying down the sign that I'd hoped for, but I have some ideas of what looks good. I'll run some cameras, come summer and fall, and try to figure out where he's coming from. I think if I put enough time into this, I'll be able to get on him. But it's been quite a few years watching this deer and trying to understand it. But as I'm sure a lot of you know, like areas, I almost despise sometimes areas that have a lot of oak trees, because if there's a change in oak crop, it can change so much their annual patterns versus what they've done years prior. But really, it just takes, once you start learning an area and understanding what other food sources they divert to, what other browse, all that kind of stuff, it can change things. So, and in addition, like this area had a new logging cut that went in last year, a big one, and that changed everything as well, which is going to be good. But it's just trying to learn and change what these patterns have changed from what I knew before that. It's just a constant, adapting and trying to figure it out. But it's the best time of year. I mean, I have kind of coined the phrase, like the 3-year strategy when it comes to looking in areas. And I was just talking to my dad about it when we were scouting over the weekend together. It's like we went into a new spot, and it's like you're just struggling finding sign. Some stuff was good, but it was hard to confirm. It's like, man, you don't figure this out the first time you go into an area. It takes time, and I think that's such an important thing to note. And you'll hear Mike talk about it in this podcast, and how it's he's learned so much over the years and just paying attention to things and noting it and moving forward. So if I just kind of wanted to share that with you guys. That's been on my mind, and yeah, just fresh my mind from scouting, I guess. Mountain Buck Scouting Camp for everybody that signed up. That's coming up April 9th and 10th. Excited about that. Still can't believe how quickly it sold out. For everyone that's going to be there. Added a whole bunch of things that I didn't advertise. Going to be giving away a lot of cool stuff. Going to be having a pretty sweet burger lunch that's going to be served. So that's going to be pretty awesome. And that one is Gunnar Emberg, who works for Tact Calories, has offered to come and do some cooking and stuff there. So I'm really excited about how that camp's going to work out. I've been working on all the material and how we're going to do this, and having Johnny Stewart and Greg Litzinger and my dad there, Kenny Kane, Bill Thompson, Spartan Forge, Taylor Chamberlain from Tethered, all these people there to be able to converse with and just have a good like deer camp feel to this scouting camp. So that's going to be awesome. I will, if everything goes well, be definitely looking to do more next year as that comes through. But anyways, I appreciate everybody listening and checking this out. If you would please, you like the episode, you like the podcast, please give it a rating and review wherever you listen to it. Helps out so much. Share it with your friends. Tag me in it if you share it on social media. Again, that just helps out so much, and I appreciate everybody that's been doing that. So with that being said, let's jump into this episode with Mike Perry. All right, we're live. Mike Perry, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to talk to you. We were chatting a little bit on the phone here prior, and a message back and forth on Facebook, and got two Pennsylvania guys on here to talk deer hunting, so I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and Mike, you've been it's funny because you've gotten some exposure over the last few years, and but you're very accomplished hunter all around, and over the last however many years that you've been hunting, it seems like. And I watched your episode of Whitetail Cribs, and have heard tales of you in the past there. So it's a pleasure to be able to get the chat.
Well, yeah, I'm glad to be on. I've been listening to your podcast for a long time. It's one of my favorite ones. So I feel like I made the big time.
Well, yeah, that's awesome. And so, Mike, I'd love to hear a little bit of background on who you are and kind of how you got into hunting a little bit.
Okay, well, I'm a supervisor for the transportation and distribution of a newspaper, and I've been in hunting since 1977 when I was 12. So it gives you my age there. But yeah, my grandparents had property out here, and my grandpa started taking me hunting when I was 12, and I kind of started honing the hunting skills because he kind of liked the bow hunt, although he had just like a permanent stand he had built in a tree, so he like just went to there, and he just was enjoying himself being up in a tree with a bow. So he'd let me what the statute of limitations are on 12-year-olds walking around with a shotgun, but he'd let me hunt squirrels. He'd let me hunt squirrels, so I really learned how to stock up on stuff at a young age, and I think that really all helped me out, as I got older into hunting and all that, and got into the bow hunting. I started that around 86. I started bow hunting pretty hard. That's when I first started shooting the compound, and and I liked it. So I got the shakes so bad on the first buck that came in on me, and it was just one of my first couple sets. I didn't know what I was doing, and I got the shakes so bad I just wanted more of it. So, and then the next year I was hunting Ohio, New York, and PA, all three states by 87.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. So, how old were you at that point when you started, hunting multiple states there?
I was 22 in 1987, so that's when I really started getting into it, and just really started pouring all my time into the scouting and stuff. I mean, I all you had back then was I didn't really know anybody who was I guess bow hunter or a real good deer hunter. I mean, my uncles and my they would go deer hunting. My dad went like once or twice in my life that I remember, but they didn't, they'd go on the first day and maybe the first Saturday, and, they weren't serious about it. So I didn't, have anybody to learn from other than just, the deer myself, being out in the woods, walking around, reading articles and magazines and stuff like that. Wasn't much in the way of videos back then other than maybe the Wenzel brothers or something like that. Maybe Primos might have been around, but, so that's what I did. I just would read articles, try to, sift through, read the tea leaves and figure out what's bullcrap and what isn't, and what would work for me and what wouldn't, and just trial and error. It's been whatever it is now, 30 something years of trial and error.
Yeah. So. It's funny. I had a similar kind of path that growing up with, going over to my grandfather's house, lived like right down the road from my parents and where I grew up at. And so as a young kid, I was over there. I was actually visiting with my grandpa the other day, and he had some pictures up on the wall of us as me and my brothers as really young kids. And he's talking about, he's like, I had you guys running around the yard hunting squirrels and everything else way before that your parents even knew that you knew how to shoot a gun. And and it was
awesome.
I loved thinking about. I remember going over there as a kid and just like you said, just sitting there waiting by the trees for the squirrels to come out and doing all it just everything else. And again, I'm not sure of the legality of most of it, but probably not at that point.
The funny thing about that is every single time I shot at a squirrel, my grandpa claimed that there was a buck walking in that ran off because I shot the shotgun. Even if I was like, a quarter of a mile away from it still.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he passed away in like 85, so he never got to see, the stuff I did. But
yeah. See as you definitely expanded from that point and grew into it. And it's I'm interested to hear, when you were reading, all those magazines and stuff back then, how much of it actually applied to like how you were hunting, or was a lot of it like, okay, this doesn't really apply to the areas that I'm hunting or the style I'm hunting?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it you could use, but it wasn't, because when you don't really know what you're doing, you take at least I took everything that this is how it has to be done. And tried to do it that way, like, rattling or, calling or hunting scrapes or rubs or rub lines and all these other things that they talk about. And, you could use all that, but it just didn't tell you how to use it, and a lot of it, like calling, I mean, you live in PA. For me, it doesn't. I mean, it works. I guess your dad's had good luck with it.
Yeah.
But I just never really had a lot of luck calling in Pennsylvania, other than maybe some smaller deer. But so like that didn't really work out for me. But it did help. It helped me, give me a foundation to what to start looking for, and then I just on my own, through trial and error and through, luckily I started doing lots of scouting. When I was young, I would be out, in my 20s, I was always out walking around the woods postseason, scouting and summertime glassing and, way before there was trail cameras, and just learning how to read sign, looking for tracks and rubs and scrapes and just bedding areas, all that stuff. You learn where the deer are going to be just through trial and error, walking. I mean, boots on the ground.
Yeah, and how crazy is that? It's like, and I still get to do a decent amount of walking and scouting, especially in the spring and everything. But I really remember like when I got out of college and like any time that it was daylight out that I wasn't at work or had some other obligation, it's just like being in the woods and walking around. Cause I remember when I was reading a lot of those magazines and I'd go to my dad and I'd be like, Dad, look, like this, this guy wrote about this and this is, you had to do this and to a T, and he's like trying to kind of tell me like, oh, like, that's good information, but like, that doesn't necessarily 100% apply to, following those exact steps to doing so. I'm like, no, like this guy's, he shot this 180-inch deer in this magazine, like this has got to be it. But it took some learning there to be able to be like, hey, a lot of it, whether you hear it on this podcast or anything else, is taking some things that you can pull from it, but really learning how to read that sign and apply it to your own area, because everywhere's different.
Exactly. You always got to be willing to learn and listen to what other people are saying, because like I'm just still constantly learning things, even though after 35 years of bow hunting or whatever, you always learning new stuff. That's why I listen to these podcasts, because you could pick up one nugget, that may help you someday. And part of the reason why I'll agree to do these every now and then is because, young guys coming up, they need to hear from people who've experienced it for a long time. The learning curve's much greater nowadays. People can learn a lot more, quicker than when I did when I was a kid. And, so I wish that someone would have been doing stuff like this when I was in my 20s. It would have made things a little easier on me, but
yeah.
So just,
no, that's funny. And when you were talking a lot about scouting and stuff there, and just walking around and boots on the ground, and how has that changed for you, like over the years, and how you've had experience? Are you still scouting as much as you used to? Has that scaled back because that you become I guess smarter with some of those things, and you being able to identify places to go to, or how has that changed for you?
Well, I definitely don't do as much of it as I used to, because back when I was younger, I was always going to new spots constantly, like a lot of different new spots, because I really craved, learn. I'd get a smile on my face when I got out of the truck and started walking somewhere I'd never been before. And I just don't do that as much nowadays, because I've narrowed down, to some really good areas. I try to find things that work for me and then duplicate that, so I have fresh spots and stuff like that. But I guess I'm saying I don't hunt as many new properties as I used to, so I don't do as much scouting as I was doing back then. Because back then I was like every friggin' day I'm out there scouting, and I don't do that anymore. Plus, now I have kids. They're 12 and 13, and they're involved in sports and stuff like that. So it takes a lot of time up, so definitely don't as much, as I used to, but
yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. And like, so we were talking a little bit beforehand. You were talking about, wanting to get out this weekend and getting out and scouting and stuff more. So what's that kind of look like for you now? Do you just try to hone in on some of those spots you've been in, maybe pick up a few sheds?
Yeah, definitely. I don't really shed hunt per se. Like I have, went out just looking for sheds before. I kind of like to scout and not really worry about the sheds. And what if I find them, that's a bonus, Yeah. But, I definitely, I'm looking, anyways, I guess with the snow on the ground and stuff like that, people think that, or I've heard guys saying that, winter scouting or postseason scouting isn't really that beneficial because need the most recent information or whatever. But to me, because I hunt a lot of flat terrain, especially in Northeast Ohio where I hunt at, it's really flat, so it's real important for me to see how the deer use the terrain, so when there's snow on the ground, it really makes it a lot easier. And even though those deer might not be, there all year long, in that same spot, you're still going to see how they use the terrain, how they travel through the area. And that's just, my opinion, real important to know when it's time to be hunting for them. You know what I mean? So, just go out in the postseason, look for all the old sign. Once the snow's gone, you can see where all the rubs and scrapes. I'm always, even though I'm hunting more of the same areas nowadays than back when I was younger, I still want to know everything that's going on. So I try to walk everything, that I can in the public places in PA that I hunt, and in the 3 farms that I hunt in Ohio.
Yeah, and so when you are out there, scouting, and you said something that kind of resonated with me there, about postseason scouting, which is something I'm passionate about and believe in. Like, so do you find that like a lot of that data and that stuff that the stuff that you're finding in that sign is something that repeats itself, like almost like, that historical data is helpful for years to come, and it's not, only the freshest sign that you're finding.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I found some of the best bedding areas that I know of in the wintertime, and and a lot of travel corridors, low spots that deer will move through, and how they work through the bigger bucks, and you could follow the tracks in the snow, and you see how they work through the thicker areas within an area, you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
kind of avoid the more open stuff. So I learned a lot of that by scouting in the wintertime. I don't walk a lot of open timber in the winter, just around here, just for the fact that it's so thick around here. The deer don't really need to be out in the open. Most of the places I hunt are really, really thick. There's bedding all over the place. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you need to know every spot where they might hole up. And then you just go back during the season. You want to scout during the season too. I mean, that's the most important thing. You want, what I mean? You gotta keep up on everything. I like to go in right before the season and go through real quick and check out and see what's going on, and then check cameras, stuff like that. Of course, everyone's doing that, but and then throughout the season, you have to keep on top of what the fresh sign is, because a lot of these bucks that I'm hunting are only there for a couple days out throughout the year. And now that I have cameras out, I'm learning that. Over the years ago, I never knew that. You find big sign, and you're thinking, "Oh, this big buck's here. Why isn't he coming in? Where's he at?" Oh, it's because he doesn't even live around there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why he's not coming in. But yeah, you figure that all out, through the cameras and all the scouting, and all year long, basically.
Yeah. And
What my red scouting regimen, I guess, would be postseason, boots on the ground, trying to decipher, just go through everything as much as I can, and then in the summertime, I'm running cameras on in places that aren't invasive. I don't get the glass as much anymore because I work nights, so it's tough on that. And then my nights off, I spend with the kids. So, but and then once the fall comes around, then I start doing a little scouting for sign again, and then just hunt morning, scout in the afternoon, hunt evenings, until the rut comes, and I'll hunt all day.
That makes sense. And one thing that you just said there was really, really important, and it's a question I get asked quite a bit, is like, okay, what if you find areas that are thick all over, and what you were saying about using the winter and using, fallen tracks and figuring out kind of where they're holding up, like that's such good information, because it is difficult when you're in, whether you're in flat ground, whether you're in steeper terrain, and when you have big timber mixed with bottoms and swamps and all that kind of stuff, a lot of it's thick. So it's not like you can look at some traditional farm country that might have, okay, there's a thicket here, that's where they're bedding at, and it's a lot harder to be able to figure that out sometimes.
Yeah. Now, if you're in the Midwest, and my hunting in the Midwest is basically, I guess, if you consider Ohio the Midwest, but Northeast Ohio is 35 miles from my house, so I don't consider it the Midwest. But so the kind of properties that I've always hunted have always been, thicker properties, because I look for that, whether it's public or private or whatever. I like to hunt places that have creek systems and swamps going through them, and beaver dams and all that stuff, and the thing with this flat land around here is, now where I live, there's a little bit of rolling hills, but like, especially over in Ohio, is, I hear these guys always talking about, how important terrain features are, in the mountains, with points and benches and, all this stuff, which I don't hunt this hill country like that, But, I think terrain features are even more important on flatland, because when you find anything that's different on flatland, it's going to be where the deer are going to go. They're traveling through there. If you're finding low spots, old creek beds that are washed out, or some little humps, they're going to bed on those. but they're going to travel to low spots. And I'm assuming they're taking advantage of, thermal pools and stuff like that, traveling them lower areas or just staying concealed, and then you when you have that thick, real thick property all over the place, you find those little low spots and places where they like to run, and then, you got something when the season comes around.
Yeah, and those places aren't easy to identify, on a map or anything. Like it's hard to aerial scout those places without actually getting the boots on the ground like you're talking about to be able to see it.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, I don't do a whole lot of map scouting. I mean, I hear people talking about it all the time. Now, if I was hunting, in the A&F all the time, yeah, I would be doing that. You know what I mean? But
yeah.
But around here, you got to walk around because I'm primarily a rut hunter. I've always been that way. I'm always looking for, pinch points and funnels and bedding areas associated with that. Like if there's bedding close to some sort of funnel or pinch point, and because it's flat, you can't see it from an aerial photo. So you got to walk and look for it, because you could have a funnel in, almost, unbroken brush and timber or whatever. It's just something that funnels deer down. So that's the type of thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for, funnels and pinch points, of course, sign, but a lot of times, as far as like rubs go, I don't put a whole lot into that all the time, because I don't think, that's reliable, that they're always coming through there. I'd rather, since I'm hunting in the rut and I'm hunting, shooting a lot of my deer later in the morning or midday or whatever, I'm sitting all day. So I want to be somewhere where deer are going to funnel through, like off a beaver levee or on a bend in a creek, an oxbow in a creek, or, just somewhere where, deer have to travel through to get from point A to point B, and if there's bedding, especially, doe bedding and doe traveling through those areas, then, those are the places I'm going to concentrate on. That's what I'm looking for when I'm scouting. I'm trying to find as many places that I can put, everything in my favor, the access, to get in without disturbing the deer, maybe water access, whatever. That's the stuff I'm looking for, is just places where I can go where there's not going to be other hunters bother me, and where the deer feel comfortable moving through, where they're funneling through.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, you mentioned does and, and bedding there. How important is it for you with, finding doe bedding, versus trying to find like buck bedding areas? Well,
it seems like a lot of times they bed in the same areas. But no, it's very important. In fact, like when I, go through my pictures, and I've noticed this before, like I tried to mentor some younger guys, on hunting, and they're all about cameras nowadays, which, I love the cameras too, but you've got to take note of the does that are on your cameras just as well as you do the bucks, because, a lot of times I'll leave cameras out. If when I am looking for new areas, especially on like public land, I'll leave cameras out, and I'll leave them there mostly, like unmolested the whole season. Like I won't go in there the first year. I'll go hunt it the next year if everything looks good on with the data on the pictures. And what I'm looking for, not only am I looking for, did any mature bucks walk through here, but I'm mainly concerned, are there does coming through here in daylight? Are there does moving through here at nighttime? Because, are there does bedding close to here? And because if you're hunting in the rut all day long, of course, everyone knows, chances are a buck could come walking right down that trail after them does come through,
Mm-hmm.
So that's I do like to pay attention to the doe bedding and the photos,
Yeah, and yeah, it's funny. Like, and so I have a similar strategy with cameras. I was just talking to someone recently. I was like, I still have, we're in the end of February here, and I still have upwards of 30 cameras in the woods. And, some of them I've like a couple areas that are brand new that I actually set out some of them last spring when I was scouting. And
Mm-hmm.
there's some risk that's involved with leaving them out as far as them not operating the whole time. But I just let them soak. I'm like, I want to learn that information and see if it's worthwhile putting my time of hunting into those places, going forward. So that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's and with especially when you're hunting the rut, and like up to this point, this year I killed my Pennsylvania deer early, but for the most part, I've killed just about all my deer during the rut, and I think a lot of people are in that situation just because you are if you have, say a week that you can take off of work, you want to increase your odds the best that you can.
That's the whole reason why I basically call myself a rut hunter. I mean, when I was younger and I had more time because I was working a first shift job and I was the manager there, and maybe I could get out a little bit early if I needed to. I was hunting every single solitary day, 7 days a week for the whole archery season. And back then I would hunt all of October, but back then, we didn't really have bigger bucks around this area of Pennsylvania, and the bucks in New York weren't, really nothing to brag about. So I would use October to fill doe tags and shoot, the first decent buck in New York or PA that came by me. And then I would concentrate on trying to shoot a big buck in Ohio. So I spent a lot of years kind of wasting Octobers, I wasn't wasting them because it taught me how to be a killer with a bow, you know what I mean? Because I killed tons of deer with a bow, and that was good for when a big buck did come in. But, now that, I've, the last 10 or 15 years with, the trail camera use, I see how valuable October can be, especially scrapes in October, mid to late October, and I get a lot of big bucks daylighting in October, but I just haven't been able to capitalize on that yet because my boys play football. And they're both, I've been going to all their practices, all their games. They're in two different divisions, and so this year I won't be going to the practices anymore because now the youngest one's at the age where they don't allow the parents to come anymore. So I'll get to hopefully capitalize on a big buck in October this year. Anyway, we'll see what happens. But I got a lot of data on a few different bucks that. I'm getting pictures of them on scrapes in daylight, that 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 21st, it's just like, man, if I'd have been there instead of football practice, I'd have probably shot that deer, but,
yeah,
you gotta do.
I know it is funny because like I feel like no matter what part of the year, if you were like to focus like a week and hunt at that time, like you'd get to figure it out kind of almost like you do with the rut, if you had that time to be able to do it. And that's like I haven't killed many deer in October. I just don't hunt that much in October just from work and everything else. And like I feel like if you put that time in like that you can figure it out. It's just a little bit different strategy, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's a great time to be out. And, I've killed a ton of deer in October. Unfortunately, they're all little bucks and does, but, I will definitely be getting into that more here. But yeah, like you say, the rut is just, it's a more target rich environment in November. I mean, someone was asking me about that today on Messenger, a friend that I've met through hunting, and he's asking, when would you take vacation or, something to that effect. And, I've shot most of my nicer bucks with a bow the 2nd through the 4th of November, and then like the 10th through the 14th. And like the day, like the 7th, the 6th and the 7th are usually good. So, I've just had way more luck killing mature bucks that first couple of weeks in November, basically because that's when I'm mainly hunting for probably no other reason than that. You know what I mean? That's what I've concentrated on. And that's when I get them. So,
Yeah, no, that is funny because the more time you have in the woods and something you also said there about like that midday, that you have a lot of luck in the midday, and that's I've been burned so many times when I was younger of not listening to my dad when I get cold and climb down at 11 in the morning and I've had it where the worst case scenarios you can think of where I'm halfway down the sticks and here comes a buck in or when start using cameras more and there's me walking out head down trying to get back to the truck, and then 45 minutes later here comes a buck cruising through and when it's the rut, it takes a lot for me to try to get out of the tree. Like I need to sit there all day.
Yeah, I've been blessed with patience. That's one thing I can say. I mean, I can sit from sun up to sundown, and I've been after particular bucks before and done that for days in a row because I just knew I was in the spot that he was going to come through and I was going to get him. But I also, if if you're hunting all day long, the wind isn't always going to be right, So I do move around, that's one of the, great things is, when you're hunting mobile, then you can do that, So
Yeah.
that's what I do. I may sit all day long, or I may sit until 10, 11, whatever, and then scout around a little bit and then find another spot and set up there. I've shot deer doing that several times. So,
By just making those minor adjustments.
just making moves, just moving around, looking for sign and setting back up. And I've done that a couple of times, not long after I've set up in the tree, and maybe 300-400 yards away from where I was originally hunting, and just get up in the tree and have a buck come in that I wanted to shoot. Now I haven't done that yet with a particular buck that I've been hunting it, but just, in Pennsylvania on like public on, just a good buck for public land around here. I've had that happen a few times like that. I've been hunting specific bucks a lot lately. And that, is a whole different ball game, So.
Yeah, that's a tough thing to do. What have you found with hunting a specific deer? Like, do you feel like you enjoy doing that more? What's your experience with it?
I like it for the fact that I like having the years of data with the deer and the pictures and the encounters and all that. That's great, but it's also very frustrating. I've had one buck in particular in Ohio that just haven't been able to catch up to him, and I haven't gotten a picture of him since the last November 8th. So I don't know. He was daylighting, chasing around the doe, and there's a lot of hunting pressure in Northeast Ohio. So he may very well be dead, or he may have just found a better place to be. But yeah, it can be very frustrating, but it's rewarding when you get them. I have been lucky enough to kill a couple that I was after for several years, and there's nothing like it when you finally kill one that you've been trying to shoot for 3 years. The one buck I started noticing him in 2012 and started hunting for him in like 2014. And ended up killing him in 2018, and he was 8.5 years old. So like that was that was like a very good experience. Very rewarding. So that's what I've been trying to get that feeling again the last couple of years, but it hasn't worked out on a particular buck yet.
So
shot some nice bucks over the last few years, but just not the exact buck that I wanted to. Basically.
Yeah. Then that deer that you said you chased, basically having photos of 2012 and then killing him in 2018. What did you learn about that deer? Like when you were hunting him, like why do you think you ended up connecting with him at the end? I'd love to hear about that. Is that the one that I think I might have heard a little bit? Is this the buck that you called Super Freak?
No, that was the one with the drop time with Super Freak. This was Boss Hogg, I called him.
So, Boss Hogg. Yeah. Okay. I gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I basically learned a lot. I learned that he liked to walk past my setups, either the day before or the day after I was there. I learned that for sure. But but he always, what he taught me was that, he didn't like to cooperate with the wind I needed. He only wanted to walk on the wind that he needed, and it finally sunk in, through looking at photos of him for years of, him coming through an area when I thought he would come in, with a certain wind, or that wind I needed for my access and for my stand setup. And he would come in on the totally freaking opposite wind. And I'd be like, what the hell is wrong with this deer? Why can't he cooperate? But finally I figured out, he liked to travel certain, and I've noticed this with a couple of older bucks that I've been hunting in Ohio, that they like to travel either like north-south or south-north, with, from the, when I'm saying from the north to the south, or from the south to the north, maybe at a little bit of an angle, say northwest down to the southeast or whatever. And they, will travel with, a crosswind a lot of times. And that way, when they're coming down that creek system, they can basically smell everything that's in that square, so they're like, basically, I don't know if they're doing it on purpose, but to me, it's conserving energy. They're covering a vast area with their nose. They don't have to run through the whole bedding area, Yeah. So that buck, I realized that, if I could get an east wind, I could get him coming down that creek system with, where he's scent checking everything that's down there. And even though it wasn't really a good setup because my wind's blowing right into the frickin' bedding area where the does are supposed to be, so, but, that's how I ended up killing him, was on the 4th of November of 2018. He came down, and we had rain for that year. It rained for like 6 or 7 days, just nonstop. It was relentless. And it just, I was so bummed because I was trying to bounce around the farm, and I'd set up and I'd check a couple cameras in that area of the farm, and nope, he isn't here, then I'd do it again in another area. And I'm like, man, over the years, I've gotten pictures of him walking down along this creek, and, it's always with the crosswinds, and we got this east wind. I'm going to try that. So I went in there. It was pouring on the 3rd, and I went in there with my Lone Wolf Alpha, and I put it up in the tree, and I ended up coming back the next morning, and it was this total bluebird, cold, crisp. My scent was rising, and I was dropping the milkweed. The thermals were rising, and the funny thing is I had these does blow at me, first thing in the morning, and that's the second time I've had that happen on a mature buck, that I had does blowing at me, and instead of getting upset about it, both times I shot Super Freak and that Boss Hogg buck after does had been blowing. And, I think that they're just like, to them it was the dinner bell or whatever. They're like, oh, there's a doe over there. You know what I mean? Like them does blew, and it wasn't long after that he came through. And then to make matters worse, when he came through, he was on a trail that was further up than what I wanted to shoot. So I went and grabbed a Mew can out of my pocket and dropped it, and it hit the freaking stand and hits the ground. And when it hit the ground, he turned and came right down the trail I needed him to. Like he thought that I heard a doe snort, and now I just heard something in the leaves down there. I mean, that's what I think was going through his mind. I can't prove it, but and he came in, and I just shot him right in the heart. He ran like 40 yards and fell over dead. But and I'm just like, oh my god. That's all it took. Okay. If I'd have known that, I'd have been dropping my bleed can out of the tree 4 years before that.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And so when you were saying how that deer would travel in the crosswinds, explain a little bit what you're talking about with him traveling like along the creek there and being able to basically smell all around him. Explain what you meant by that.
Okay, well, the bedding area was to my west, and it's really thick, and it's about 10 acres. And I noticed in the past that he traveled, and I'm not saying just on the east wind, not at all, but I noticed that he traveled a particular trail that went from the northeast. It kind of came down along, and because the creek has bends in it, and that he didn't come straight down the creek, but he comes kind of like from the northwest down and transition down like to the southeast, and they crossed the creek down past me, where I was at. I was right on the very transition of the bedding area. I was right where all the thick, it's like full of multiflora rose and white oak, swamp white oaks, and kind of marshy and mushy and stuff in there, but really thick, like you can barely walk through it. And he came right down that transition where the more open oaks and stuff were, and that way, because the wind was blowing out of the east, he could smell, whatever was coming, whatever was in the, in the bedding area, is what I was thinking. So that's what he was doing. He was just walking down, scent checking, down along the creek.
Yeah. It's crazy because, there's something that always stuck in my mind, that was told me by my family, my dad and my uncle, Francie specifically. They'd always said whitetails and creek bottoms, like it's just like this thing, and you probably heard a little bit of us talking about it, on the podcast before, and like creek bottoms are just like they're in the rut. I've killed more deer in creek bottoms than anywhere else, and like especially like those thick, wide creek bottoms that have like just all that thick cover down in there. Like I always find does bedding in those places are off to one side, and it's like, and another thing you mentioned, with beaver ponds and everything there, like all of those things combined just like are to me, I see one of those areas and it's just like, I just start smiling, like whether it's in the spring or whenever it is, I'm like, this is it.
Oh yeah. Those creek systems are like highways for them when it's a rut. And they love, like if you get a setup on a beaver levee where they dam up like the one spot, you know, it's a real kind of like deep, slow moving creek that's maybe 30 feet or maybe, I don't know, 20 yards wide or whatever, something like that, 60 feet wide. And, you know, when the beavers dam that up, them deer, you know, and they're going from one side of the creek to the other. They're crossing right there. So it you know, almost makes it like shooting fish in the barrel. You know, I mean, you know what I mean? Because they have to come through there for whatever reason. They just don't want to go through that. They don't want to jump down, you know, because it's a higher bank creek, you know, and it's deep. So it's like they're just going to cross and where the old beaver levees are, where it's more shallow, or right on the outside of where a bend in the creek where a creek would oxbow, you know, and when the water comes out of that oxbow, you know, it deposits gravel and stuff, you know, and so it's shallower right there. So there'll be like riffles a lot of times or whatever. They'll come through right there, you know. You find stuff like that. That's really good for hunting in a rut if you're going to be, you know, looking for bucks cruising.
You know that's there's a spot that I'm thinking of in my head that it's probably the only spot that I've hunted where I've shot multiple deer out of the same tree, and it was a spot just like that. So there's like a beaver pond right to my back, and like if you're thinking about it, it actually does run north to south. So like the creek flows from north to south, and then just to the south of the tree I'd set up, there's a beaver pond there, and it's like it's perfect one from like even like the wind standpoint, because you got your thermals that are coming down that creek, and then like they hit that, especially when it's cold out, then like it hits that beaver pond, like even like your scent, and it just goes straight up. Like in the mornings, everything just all the thermals just rise, and that water's you know that body of water is warmer than the air is, and it's just causing that to go up, and you feel like almost invincible in those spots. And like I think I'm thinking of it in this spot, there was some gravel because right on an oxbow like you're talking about there, and I've killed 2 deer out of the tree, and I've missed 2 deer out of the tree. And the one that I missed is one I'll never forget about. Some of the early listeners will remember this deer I called Hercules, and he ended up being over 170 inches by the time he ended up dying. But at the time that I shot him, or I basically clipped his leg just underneath. I'd shot low and misjudged the yardage, but he was in the 160s at that point. It was the biggest deer I'd ever shot at, and he came right down that creek and was going across that crossing there. And then the same thing with this other deer, this old wide low tine deer that I missed it like, I don't know, it was pretty close, but I just got so shooken up when he appeared, because it's tough along those creeks sometimes to be able to hear, which is kind of can be detrimental to you at some points.
Oh yeah. Well, the ones that I'm hunting aren't really like I don't know if it because you're hunting more mountainous area. There's probably the creek is probably colder temperature of water and maybe not running as fast. I'm just assuming, I don't know, but the ones I'm hunting are like slower moving, you know, creeks. So like the one spot that I've shot a couple of Pope and Young bucks out of, this one particular spot where there's a bend in the creek. You know, I said before, you could watch the same leaf, you know, float in the water in front of you for 12 hours in the frickin' tree stand. You know, the water don't move fast because it's been dammed up by the beavers in so many spots. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But the nice thing about that, and I figured this out back in like the mid 2000s, was when I hunted, you know, areas like that. You know, if you know how in the evening time, when you know the wind dies down a lot of days, you know, if you don't have a high wind day, you know, you got to make sure you're set up on the right side of a funnel like that and be close to the water, because, you know, for whatever reason, that water pulls your scent towards it. You know, so if you were on the other side of the trail, your scent would be blowing right across the trail. But you get up in the tree right up against like a slow moving body of water like that, and your scent pulls towards that water, you know. So
yeah. It's pretty amazing once you just and those are things like you learn like from just spending time there and trying it. It takes. I'm sure you learned being on the wrong side of the trail from experience and like
Oh yeah.
like that's how you learn those things.
Exactly.
Oh, that's crazy, that story of Boss Hogg and like that, that many years of hunting them. Did you find that like when you were running cameras and stuff that was like a similar time of year that he would come back into that area,
Yeah.
or was it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, and just him, just like some other bucks in that area they're around. You get a few photos of them in the summertime, on the beans or whatever, but they're not always on that farm, and then you don't get a picture of them until about the 15th of October or so. And then you start getting pictures of them in that Halloween up through the first week of November time frame. And then he pulls a Houdini on you, and then he's gone, then you're thinking, oh my God, he got shot, he got killed during gun. You don't know. Then he shows back up in late season, and it's just crazy. As much as the deer travel around here, I mean, and as thick as it is, you would think that they wouldn't have to, but I'm going to tell you about this buck I was hunting in Northeast Ohio. It was very, what do you say, distinguishable because he had splits on his 2s and his 3s, and he had a torn ear. So this buck, I had gotten pictures of him on our farm in late season for 4 years. And, I figured he was, a good probably 6-year-old or maybe older. Okay. So he would come right after, he'd start showing up right around gun season because everybody, is pushing deer in Northeast Ohio. It's those deer drives. So when those guys start driving the deer, I get these bucks that show up every year right after gun season and, or during gun season even. But, so anyhow, this year when gun season came around and I didn't get any pictures of him, I'm like, man, I wonder why he didn't come around. Maybe he got killed or whatever. So I'm down talking to an Amish guy one day, and after gun was over, and he's telling me about this buck. He's like, oh, you should have seen the one that got shot down the road. It had splits on the 2s and the 3s, and they were hunting it a few years. They knew about it because they had a ripped deer. I'm like, no way. And he's like, yeah. And here, that was 6.5 miles from where our farm is. That buck was shot in the middle of October. That's why we never ever got any pictures of him. But so he was probably living. He was probably living in where he got shot in October. I'm saying that's probably where he lived. And then he would travel as far as 6.5 miles because I had pictures of him for 4 years in a row. I mean, I'd get pictures of him, a random picture in October or whatever. I mean, he came down looking for does too, but and I have a few bucks like that they come through, and it's always right around the same time frame. In fact, this year I had a buck I called TD that I've been hunting for 3 years, and he's got these like 12-inch brow tines, and he's just a giant. And he's a monster. And he last year it was the 14th of October, a cold front blew in 2021, and my older son had a football game on a Thursday. And man, I said to myself, man, I'm telling you right now, TD is going to come through that spot. I know he's going to come through there. And it was friggin' cold. I'm sitting at that football game, just getting sleeted on and stuff, rain, and I'm just like, oh my. And then when I go and check the cameras, there he was, 15 minutes before it gets, dark, it gets dark out. So then this year in 2020, that was 2020. Now this year in 2021, the same freaking thing it was a different date, but it was the Thursday of the same week. So it was actually basically 365 days later. I'm at my kid's football game in the same kind of crap. And doesn't that buck walk right past that exact same camera again? There's a cell camera this time, and it goes off, and I'm looking at the picture of him, and I'm thinking, what did I do to deserve this? But yeah, that's.
Oh yeah, you're gonna have a choice to make this year.
Yeah, so if he's still alive, I can tell you where I'm going to be on the 14th of October. I don't care if it's 75 degrees out. I'm going to be there. But
Yeah. Oh man, that's hilarious. That's funny. So like, over the years of hunting, a specific deer and learning all of these things, what are some of the things like you'd say like if you had to like point it out and be like, those are some of the top lessons that I've learned, whether it's, something with your scouting or how you're hunting, is there anything that comes to your mind that you think would be beneficial to people to mention?
well, one thing for sure with these particular bucks is unless they actually live on your farm, so like they're there all the time, don't stress that you're and I know this goes against what a lot of people say, but don't stress about your pressure in the spot too much, because first of all, I've had bucks that were actually, actually kind of in their core area, and I haven't pushed them out by hunting them. And then second, these bucks that only come through in a certain time frame, if you're hunting a specific buck, if he's only coming through in, say, the last few days of October, the first couple of days of November, you're not going to hurt nothing by being there, scouting or checking the camera or whatever you need to do, looking for sign, looking for tracks. You're not going to hurt nothing by going through there. I mean, you don't want to act like, an idiot. You're not going to go pull a motor out of your car and just walk around, with oil all over your boots or whatever. But, you just, be tactical about it. But I used to get too paranoid. Like I was afraid to hunt at some points in my life. Like I was so afraid to go and do things and try stuff because everybody tells you in these articles and stuff how you can't do this and you can't do that. When it comes to deer hunting, you can just basically do whatever, because I've seen so many strange things happen by me and friends of mine that there's no written in stone method or technique or a taboo that you can and can't do. I mean, you can kill a deer pretty much any way. So I guess what taking a long time telling you this, don't be afraid
perfect.
To actually hunt that buck down, because you've got to go in there and capitalize when you have the chance, because if you wait, you may never get the chance.
And that what you just said there, like that speaks directly to me at times, because like I feel like that I'm a decently aggressive hunter, but I've realized that my weakness is when I've been hunting a specific deer, and when I say I'm hunting a specific deer, I've shot other deer while hunting the specific deer. But when I was trying to hunt this deer, like I caught myself like being afraid of doing something, because I was pretty sure on like some areas that I thought he was living in, and I was so afraid of like pushing in at the wrong times and trying to wait for the right times, and that can be detrimental to it, like kind of like you were saying there.
Yeah, well, see, like that buck's super freak that I was hunting, his core area kind of like he bedded mostly off of the farm I was hunting, but not far off. Like he was up on, there was a hill, and the neighbors baited the shit out of the deer. Like they had feeders and friggin' tubes hanging out of trees, and the ladder stands next to corn piles all over the place. So that buck basically, they didn't know it, but he basically, stayed up there and watched every move they made, So, and the other problem was on the property that I hunted, right on the border of it, there was a big beaver dam that went through there, and there was guys duck hunting it all the freaking time, and it just drove you nuts, because, and I wanted to kill this buck so friggin' bad for 3 years. And I'm just like, the first 2 years, I'm like, you know what? I can't hunt them, because we got all these duck hunters over here. These guys are friggin' throwing out 50 pounds of corn every day over here. I'll never get him. He's never going to walk in daylight. Right. But what I had done that second year I was hunting him, the year before I killed him, which he actually had a bigger rack that year. I don't know what happened, why he went down a little bit, but the year before I killed him, I went and put out like cameras, just to try to see where he was coming on and off the property. And the one day I went down to get it, and I couldn't find it. I thought it was stolen. So I'm back there in the spring. Now this is the spring of the year I ended up killing him. I'm there in the spring, and I'm walking along, turkey hunting, and I look over and I'm like, holy shit, there's my camera. So I take that camera down, and I find out that this buck had walked through there in daylight between, it was like the 4th of November and like the 10th or the 12th of November. He went through down this one trail that goes through this, basically a red brush or dogwood, whatever you want to call it. And he was going down this real thick stuff. I had put a camera there because I had seen big tracks on it that year, and he daylighted it like 3 times. So I'm like, all right, I'm not even going to hunt this spot until the first time I got a daylight photo of him last year. I'm going to start hunting it. So I waited till like November 4th or whatever, and I went in there, and on the second sit, I had a creek, a small feeder creek that was no more than like 3 feet wide, that snaked down this little ravine that I could walk down to get down to where this trail was that he had been walking the previous year. And my boots never touched dirt. I walked right down that creek, and I climbed up the tree, and as luck would have it, I had a really good wind, and I ended up hunting that stand like 6 days in a row, all day long. And I saw him twice. And on the 9th of November, he came in behind me, actually straight downwind of me with a doe, and I wheezed him up to like 10 yards. He came in the back of the tree, and it had been raining, and right when I drew back, my bow made a little squeak, and he looked right up at me, and he was 10 yards, like he was one step away, and he turned and took a couple leaps and went right back over to the doe. I mean, like, that was the most sick feeling I've ever had. Oh. But the thing of it was, the 2 times I saw him, and that day, and I had seen him the morning of the 7th, both times he walked by a particular cherry tree that was right, maybe 20 yards, 30 yards in off the neighboring property. And what he was doing is he's cutting through the cattails, coming across the swamp through the cattails and coming into that property. I watched him go there twice. So I went there with my lone wolf and climbed up in the tree on the evening of the 14th. I got there at like 1:30 in the afternoon, and I went there and I got up in that tree, and it wasn't long after I got up in that tree, this doe starts, and it might have been around 2:30. This doe just starts snorting like mad. And I'm just like, there's no way she can't smell me. I mean, my wind's blowing right over the swamp. She can't, what is she snorting at? Well, that year happened to be a bunch of big bucks in that school. I knew real well. And he's walking down, and doesn't he go under the tree that I just spent 6 days hunting? Walks right under it. So what the doe was snorting at was, she evidently heard him, because the way the wind was blowing, she couldn't have smelled him, but she must have heard him. And so she started carrying on, and then he, starts coming down after her. And I'm like, oh man, I got to do something. He ain't coming this way. So I usually don't call, but I got out my grunt call. I tried that. I mean, I was throwing the kitchen sink at him. I had a rattle bag in my pouch. I got that out. I'm like, clicking that around, and he didn't care. He's chasing her around up in the apple trees. And I'm like, man. And then I hear a deer coming. It was real quiet, and I hear this deer coming, and here comes this little fawn, and she's walking right down the transition along the edge of the cattails, and where I was set up in that cherry tree, and she's walking right at me, and I hear this grunting, and I'm like, all right, maybe this is super freak, hopefully. And here it's another, like 130-inch 8-point right on her tail, and he's following her, and I'm just like, you know what? It's the 14th of November. If this buck gives me a shot, I'm shooting him. I mean, I'm out of vacation. I don't want to gun hunt. I'm not against gun hunting, but I mean, I'd rather just, let's end it now. You know what I mean? And so he's walking up, and I'm getting ready to get drawn back on this buck. And I hear something. I could hear the water sloshing behind me in the cattails. I could just hear something walking real slow. And, the fawn steps into the cattails to my left, and this buck is like 30 yards behind her, but he's walking straight at me, this 130-incher. The other one, he's up there chasing the doe around, grunting and stuff. And I hear this buck I hear this deer walking behind me. And as soon as that fawn goes into those cattails, it sounded like something exploded. I mean, he started chasing her, the super freak, starts chasing her through the cattails, through the muck, comes running out and ends up stopping right directly. The fawn's like on one side of the tree. And luckily I drew back when I heard him coming, I knew it was a buck because he was grunting. And when I looked down through my peep and saw it was him, and he was like 6 yards away from me, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. And just smoked him. And then the thing of it is like, when he ran, the arrow was sticking up out of him. It looked to me like kind of far back, and I'm like, oh my God. So I had a lighted knock, and he ran over onto the neighbors, and there was a goldenrod field right there. And I didn't notice the knock at first. I stayed in the tree, and then as it started getting dark, I could see the knock glowing. And don't you know, I sat in that tree for 5 hours. I called off of work and sick. I sat up there for 5 hours in the dark looking at that knock because when the goldenrod would sway in the wind, it looked like the knock was moving. So I thought he was alive. So I went back the next morning, and sure enough, I mean, there was a blood trail that a blind man could have followed it if I would have even looked. But I was so paranoid, I tiptoed out of there. It was funny.
Oh,
but yeah, that was a
cow.
satisfying feeling. Yeah, I had 3 Pope and young bucks chasing around a couple of does. On the 14th of November. It's just anything can happen. After a doe snorting.
Yeah, I love I love the fact that both of those deer that we talked about the stories here had to do with the doe snorting, and that's a day in the tree that we dream about right there, having bucks chasing around doing that. It gets me just fired up. Even though it's February, it just gets me so excited.
Yeah, that's what we live for.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, and it just those it's hilarious because when you'd hunted, what was it? You said 6 days prior to that,
I hunted 6 days in a row, and then I had a day or two that I wasn't in there, and then I went in and shot.
Yeah, but you had all those other days of probably a lot of just lull and not much action, and then you have something like that, and it's that's why we do it.
Exactly. Yeah, because I did see him on 2 of those sits, and the first morning I passed up a really nice 9-point. That the first morning I sat there, he came down, just read the script, ripped apart a bunch of trees, made a scrape, kicked stuff everywhere, and I'm like, nope, I'm not shooting him. I'm waiting, now if that buck would have been there on the 14th before the Super Freak, I probably would have shot him. But that on that first sit, I was like, no, I'm not going to shoot him. And normally a buck I would have shot, but I didn't. But I guess what I was trying to say is, there's situations where a buck that I put pressure on didn't leave, and I still ended up killing him. So I hunted 6 days in a row all day long, and I had it out, definitely helped quite a bit with being able to hunt that many days in a row. I had good wind, which helped, but he also saw me in the tree, you know what I mean? But I shot him not 100 yards from where he saw me in the tree, maybe 80 yards, I just moved over, and got on the trail that he was coming on.
Yeah. Oh man, that's that's awesome. And just the I think with you saying, having patience and being able to do that and I think one thing that you said there just makes you think deer, we give the deer a little bit more credit than sometimes, than they may deserve, as far as thinking, overthinking it, I guess.
No, I've said this before, and I was on the podcast with Chad over there. He same thing. We sometimes outthink ourselves, and these deer, we think that they're all MIT grads. You know what I mean? Yeah, they're survivors and they're smart. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's easy to go out and kill mature bucks or whatever, but when it's all said and done, they have to eat, they have to breed, and they have to move. And so you just have to be there and then try to figure it out. It can happen anytime. That's the great thing about bow hunting, is any second your whole season can change around.
Yeah. So. No, that's so true. Is there anything else that you can think of that you want to leave the listeners with here, as far as anything else, any words of advice, any words of wisdom that you've learned over the years that you want to leave this off with?
Well, my advice would be hunt mobile, so that you can put yourself in the right situations, most of all, and don't rely on trail cameras. Only, use it as you have to use and this is what I try to tell these young guys that I've had these guys that I used to go to the shows for United Bow Hunters of Pennsylvania and sit in the booth and try to get people signed up for the UBP. And, I have a 180-inch buck that I shot over in New York with a muzzleloader that I have mounted life size, and we'd put that up on the table and everybody gawk at it like, ooh, and then we'd be like, hey, you never hear of the United Bow Hunters of PA, But, I met some young guys that way. And I one thing I always would tell them is, you can't, because now hunting with trail cameras, you can't just look at those trail cameras and hunt off of that. You can use it, but you can't just hunt off of it because, too much gets missed, and the deer could be one side or the other of it. So, be mobile and don't just worry about trail cameras. I mean, this year I, for the first time, ran cell cameras. I had 5 of them out, and I put camera, a static, it's like a regular camera with situation, and you would not believe the amount of stuff that gets missed on a cell camera. I mean, now, of course, I'm not running the real great ones. I was just using Tacticams, but, while they're sending that photo, they're not sending another, they might take a picture, but they're not sending another photo. I mean, several different bucks that I never got the pictures of until I pulled the cards on the cell cameras and the cards on the regular cameras. And I seen all the stuff I was missing. So that's just cell cameras. Now you want to talk about just, a regular trail camera. I've taken them and put in lots of times 3 or 4 of them in a small area and pointed them different directions. And, some deer will avoid them totally. They'll walk around them. You get the picture of a doe running by. You don't see the buck. I mean, you just can't go off the cell cameras or trail cameras alone. So that's, I think, one of the biggest problems with younger hunters and people coming up, into the hunting now is they rely too much of their scouting relies on trail camera photos. If they're getting out of their stands and going and checking cameras when they should be hunting, and scouting and looking for sign, looking for, a track in the mud don't lie, So I guess that's one of my things of advice I could give the people is just, anybody, not just young guys, but, because I've got myself in the same trap where I'm like, wow, geez, I haven't gotten any pictures. I said that earlier in the podcast, I haven't got a picture of a TD since November 8th. That doesn't really mean that, they clear cut a piece of woods right across the street. He may have been in there all year after that. I don't know, so.
Yeah, no, I think that's such good advice for anybody. And it comes down to the whole, I think, all the gear and stuff that's out there, and I rely on a lot of that stuff too, but it's like, that's they're tools. They're not everything when it comes to hunting.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me here and helping everybody out. Like, I think that's just that's awesome that you were willing to do this.
No problem. Anytime.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll talk to you later, Mike.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.